The morning sun peeked over the desert hills, casting long shadows across the main street of Starpoint, Arizona. Diane Miller wiped her hands on her apron and stepped back to admire her work. The front window of her diner now featured a large green alien made of paper cutouts, holding a sign that read, "Welcome Earthlings and Others." Diane had owned the Starlight Diner for nearly 20 years, but the last week of July always brought a special kind of excitement. The streets filled with visitors, the hotels booked solid, and her cash register rang nonstop. The Starpoint UFO Festival was her idea 15 years ago, and it had grown from a small weekend event into the town's biggest attraction. "You think the streamers are too much?" she asked, pointing to the silver and green decorations that hung from every available surface inside the diner. Frank Ellis, her friend since high school and now a retired science teacher, looked up from his coffee. His gray eyebrows rose above his glasses. "For a UFO festival, there's no such thing as too much, Diane." Frank had been helping with the science exhibits for years. He didn't believe in aliens himself, but he loved seeing the excitement on kids' faces when they learned about space. "This year's going to be the biggest yet," Diane said, refilling his cup. $5,000 for the costume contest winner. The mayor finally agreed it was worth the investment. The bell above the door jingled, and Diane's nephew Jack walked in. At 26, Jack had the same brown eyes as Diane but his father's height. He carried an expensive-looking camera over his shoulder. "Morning, Aunt Diane." "Hey, Mr. Ellis." Jack slid onto a stool at the counter. "I've been up since 5 getting sunrise shots for the documentary." "You and that film," Diane said, but her smile showed her pride. "You want your usual." "Please, and maybe some extra bacon. I'm heading back out to the ridge to film the vendor setups." Diane disappeared into the kitchen while Frank turned to Jack. "So this documentary of yours, still think you'll get it into film festivals?" Jack nodded, his eyes bright with ambition. The American obsession with alien life is a cultural phenomenon. Everyone's done the conspiracy angle, but no one's really explored why we want to believe so badly. He took a sip from the water glass Diane had left him. "Plus, this town goes all out. It's visual gold." Outside the diner, a truck drove by slowly, pulling a trailer with a half-built flying saucer on it. People on the sidewalks pointed and took pictures with their phones. Diane returned with a plate stacked with eggs, toast, and extra bacon. "Festival committee meeting at 4, she reminded Jack. "Don't be late. We need your help setting up the stage for the costume contest." "I'll be there," Jack promised through a mouthful of toast. "Is Gary bringing the lighting equipment?" Said he would. And his wife made those special alien cookies again. 200 of them. Frank chuckled. "Remember last year when that guy from California showed up in that elaborate costume? What was he supposed to be?" "A Pleiadian light being," Diane said, rolling her eyes. "Spent $3,000 on that costume, and still lost to Billy's papier-mâché flying saucer." The three laughed, comfortable in their yearly tradition. Jack finished his breakfast quickly and paid, even though Diane tried to wave away his money. "Family doesn't pay," she insisted, but he left the bills on the counter anyway. "I'm going to get some shots of the crash site display they're setting up at the old quarry," he said, adjusting his camera strap. "Then I'll meet you at the community center." As Jack left, Diane watched him with a mixture of worry and admiration. "That boy and his dreams," she said softly. Frank nodded. "Big dreams are good. This town could use more dreamers." Neither of them knew that, just beyond the ridge where Jack was heading, a real alien ship was about to pierce Earth's atmosphere, its navigation systems failing as it approached the very town that celebrated the idea of visitors from beyond the stars. As the day warmed up, festival goers began arriving in earnest. Cars with license plates from neighboring states lined the streets. The local radio station played science fiction themed songs between announcements about festival events. And high above, barely visible in the bright blue sky, a small craft shimmered as it began its unplanned descent. The small ship shook violently as it entered Earth's atmosphere. Inside, Commander Zix gripped the control panel, his four-fingered hands working quickly across the flashing lights. The ship's smooth metal interior glowed with soft blue light, now interrupted by flashing red warning signals. "Status report, Vila," Zix said, his voice calm despite the situation. Science Officer Vila looked up from her station. Her large, almond-shaped eyes blinked rapidly as she processed data. Unlike Zix, whose skin had a greenish-gray tone, Vila's skin shimmered with a bluish tint. Both stood about 5 feet tall, with slender bodies and enlarged craniums. "Main propulsion offline. Backup systems failing. We are on a direct course with the planet's surface," she replied. "Specifically, a desert region of the land mass they call North America." Zix sighed. The mission was supposed to be simple: observe the developing civilization from orbit, collect data, and return to the mothership. No contact. No landings. Certainly no crashes. "Can we control our descent at all?" he asked. Vila's fingers danced across her panel. "Minimal control. I can redirect us away from the human settlement, but impact is inevitable." "Then do it. Protocol demands we avoid population centers." Zix engaged the emergency landing sequence and activate the cloaking shield. "Last thing we need is to be seen." Their ship, the Celestial Whisper, was only 30 feet long, tiny compared to the mothership waiting beyond the moon. It was designed for stealth observation, not atmospheric flight. As it plummeted toward Earth, its outer hull began to glow from friction. "Cloaking active but degrading," Vila announced. "It will fail upon impact." "Emergency beacon activated. The mothership will receive our distress signal, but response time estimate is 3 Earth days minimum." The ship rattled as it tore through clouds. Through the view screen, they watched the desert floor rushing up to meet them. "Brace for impact," Zix ordered. They secured themselves in their crash harnesses as the ship's nose tipped upward in a final attempt to slow their descent. With a deafening sound, the Celestial Whisper plowed into the sandy earth, skidding nearly a quarter-mile before coming to rest between 2 large rock formations. For several moments, only the hiss of damaged systems and the soft ping of cooling metal broke the silence. Then Zix groaned, unbuckling his harness. "Vila, are you injured?" "Negative," she replied, already running diagnostics. "Ship integrity is at 63%. Life support stable. Communications damaged, but functional for short range." Zix moved to the main view screen, now cracked but still working. It showed the barren landscape outside, rocks, sand, and scrubby plants under a brilliant blue sky. "At least we're somewhat concealed between these rock formations," he noted. "What's our exact location relative to human activity?" Vila pulled up a map. "We're approximately 2 Earth miles from a settlement. Small population, under 10,000 individuals. Any immediate search parties or emergency responses headed our way." She checked the sensors. None detected. Our cloaking held long enough to mask the worst of our descent. Locals might have seen something like a meteor. Zix moved to the ship's storage unit and removed their emergency kit. "Damage assessment. Can we repair and leave?" Vila's expression, subtle movements around her eyes and mouth, conveyed concern. "Possible, but we need materials. Our propulsion system requires specific mineral compounds to repair. According to my scan, some are available in this region naturally, but others," she hesitated, "we may need to acquire from human sources." Zix's large eyes widened. "You're suggesting we make contact. That violates our primary directive." "Not necessarily contact," Vila clarified. "Just acquisition of materials. We can use our personal cloaking devices to remain undetected." Zix considered their options. The mothership would eventually come, but waiting in a damaged ship was risky. If humans discovered them first, the consequences would be unpredictable. "We'll wait until dark," he decided. "Then we'll scout the human settlement. Maybe we can find what we need without being noticed." Little did the aliens know that the settlement ahead was Starpoint, Arizona, a town currently filling with people who desperately wanted to believe in extraterrestrial visitors, and who would be looking at the sky with hopeful eyes rather than fearful ones. Jack Miller had woken up before sunrise. He wanted to catch the perfect light for his documentary. The ridge outside of town offered a great view of Starpoint as it prepared for the festival's first day. He set up his camera on a tripod, yawning as he adjusted the focus. The sky was turning from black to deep blue. Stars were still visible, but fading. Jack took a sip of coffee from his travel mug and pressed record. Starpoint, Arizona, Day 1 of the UFO Festival, he narrated quietly. Population normally 5,000, but this weekend it will triple in size, all for a celebration of something most people have never seen. As he filmed the sunrise, a bright streak crossed the sky. At first, Jack thought it was a shooting star, but it was too large, too slow, and it seemed to change direction slightly before disappearing behind the hills to the north. "No way," Jack whispered, making sure his camera was capturing everything. That was not normal. He hesitated only briefly before packing up his equipment. Whatever had fallen was only a mile or two away. If it was a meteor, it would make great footage for his documentary. If it was something else, well, that was even better. Jack hiked through the desert for almost 45 minutes, following the direction of the falling object. The sun was fully up now, and sweat dampened his t-shirt. Just as he was considering turning back, he spotted something unusual between two large rock formations. At first, he thought it was just a reflection of sunlight on metal. But as he got closer, he saw that it was something smooth and oval-shaped, partially buried in the sand. It had left a long groove in the earth behind it. "This can't be real," Jack muttered, raising his camera. He approached slowly, filming every step. The object was about 30 feet long, made of a material he couldn't identify. It wasn't like any plane or satellite debris he ever seen. The surface had no rivets or seams, just smooth sections that seemed to flow together. Jack was so focused on filming that he didn't notice movement to his right. When he finally turned, he nearly dropped his camera in shock. Two figures stood watching him. They were shorter than him, maybe 5 feet tall, with large heads and slim bodies. Their skin had an odd color, one greenish-gray, the other bluish. Their eyes were huge and dark, without visible pupils. They looked exactly like the aliens from movies and TV shows. Too exactly. "Very funny," Jack said, recovering from his surprise. "Great costumes, guys. You're a bit early for the festival, though." The two figures looked at each other, then back at Jack. "Your humor defense mechanism is understandable," said the one with greenish skin. Its mouth moved oddly with the words, but the voice sounded almost normal. "But we are not wearing costumes." Jack laughed nervously. "Right, and I'm the president. Look, did my Aunt Diane put you up to this? Or was it Frank?" The blue-tinted one stepped forward. "We are not from your planet. I am Science Officer Vila of the Arcturian Exploration Fleet. This is Commander Zix. Our ship has experienced failure and made an emergency landing." Jack stared at them, waiting for them to break character and laugh. They didn't. "You're serious," he said finally, "or you're really committed to the vid." "We need specific minerals to repair our ship," Zix said. "Our emergency beacon has been activated, but our rescue is approximately 3 Earth days away." Jack looked from the aliens to the ship and back again. His documentary filmmaker instincts were at war with his disbelief. "Prove it," he said. "Show me something a human in a costume couldn't do." Vila reached into a pocket-like opening in her clothing and pulled out a small device. She pressed it, and suddenly she was no longer visible. Jack gasped. Then she reappeared right beside him, close enough that he could see the unusual texture of her skin. "Do you require further proof?" she asked. Jack swallowed hard. "No, that'll do it." He looked at his camera, still recording. "This is either the biggest discovery in human history or the best prank ever played on me. We need your assistance," Zix said. "We cannot be discovered by your authorities." "But you crashed at the perfect time," Jack said, suddenly grinning. "This town is about to be full of people dressed as aliens. No one will look twice at you." Jack drove his old pickup truck slowly down the back roads, constantly checking his mirrors. In the passenger seat, Commander Zix stared out the window with wide eyes. Science Officer Vila sat in the middle, examining a small device in her hands. "You need to look more relaxed," Jack said. "People will think you're strange if you sit so stiff." "We are strange," Zix replied. "To your people, at least." Jack sighed. "That's not what I meant. Just try to act casual." The aliens had agreed to Jack's plan. He would take them to his aunt's house, help them blend in, and assist them in finding the minerals they needed. In exchange, they would let him document everything, once they left Earth, of course. "Your transportation technology is primitive but interesting," Vila noted, running her four-fingered hand along the dashboard. "It burns fossil fuels." "Yeah, and this old truck burns more than most," Jack admitted, "but it gets me around." They reached the edge of town. Already, the streets were filling with festival visitors. People wore alien masks, carried toy spaceships, and took photos next to UFO decorations. A banner stretched across Main Street read, "Welcome Earthlings and visitors from beyond." "This is very convenient," Zix observed. "Your suggestion to hide in plain sight is logical." Jack parked behind his aunt's house and quickly led the aliens inside through the back door. Thankfully, Diane was still at her diner. "Okay, first things first," Jack said, pacing his aunt's living room. "We need a cover story. You're my friends from college who work in special effects. You've come to help me with my documentary and to enter the costume contest." Vila tilted her head. "Your human educational and vocational systems are still unclear to us. Just say you make movie costumes and props in California," Jack simplified. "Now let's work on how you act. You need to seem more human." For the next hour, Jack taught the aliens basic human customs: handshakes, small talk, eating with utensils. Zix struggled with idioms, repeatedly asking Jack to explain phrases like "break a leg" and "piece of cake." Vila was a quicker study. She practiced walking with a more human gait and softened her precise speech patterns. She became fascinated with the radio, turning the dial to hear different music styles. "This is remarkably similar to our harmonic resonance art," she said, swaying slightly to a pop song. Jack heard the front door open. "That's my aunt. Remember your story." Diane Miller walked in and froze at the sight of the aliens sitting on her couch. Then she laughed. "Jack, you didn't tell me your friends were coming. And wow, those costumes are amazing." Jack laughed nervously. "Surprise. Aunt Diane, these are my friends from college. Zach and Vicky. They do special effects work." "Nice to meet you," Zix said, extending his hand as Jack had taught him. His handshake was too stiff, but Diane didn't seem to notice. "Those costumes are incredible," she said, examining their features closely. "The skin texture, the eye movement. I've never seen anything so realistic." "Thank you," Vila replied. "We have worked very hard on our costumes. They're going to enter the contest," Jack added quickly, "and help me with filming." "Well, you're all welcome to stay here," Diane said. "I've got the spare room ready, and Jack, you know where the air mattress is." As Diane went to the kitchen to make lunch, Jack whispered to the aliens, "See, it's working perfectly." But he spoke too soon. The doorbell rang, and Diane called out, "Jack, can you get that? It's probably Gary with the festival flyers." Jack opened the door to find Gary Peters, the local hardware store owner and amateur astronomer. Gary's eyes went wide when he spotted Zix and Vila. "Holy cow," Gary said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Those aren't costumes from a kit. Did you make those?" Zix and Vila looked at Jack, unsure how to respond. "Custom made," Jack said quickly. "One of a kind." Gary circled the aliens, studying them. The proportions are perfect, based on the Hill abduction description, right? But with some creative touches. He leaned closer to Vila. How did you get the skin to shimmer like that? Trade secret, Jack interrupted. They're, entering the contest. Gary nodded slowly, still staring. Well, they're gonna win for sure, unless. A gleam appeared in his eyes. Say, can I take a closer look at those costumes? For scientific curiosity, Jack's mind raced as Gary waited for an answer. The hardware store owner was clearly too interested in Zix and Vila's costumes. Actually, Gary, Jack said quickly, we need to get to the festival grounds. Aunt Diane, didn't you say the committee needed help setting up the stage? Diane looked confused. Well, yes, but that's not until. Great, we should go now. Jack grabbed his camera bag and motioned for the aliens to follow him. Gary frowned. Maybe later then. I'm really curious about the material. Never seen anything like it. Sure, later, Jack agreed, knowing later would never come. He hurried the aliens out the door and down the street. Once they were safely away, Zix spoke. That human was suspicious. Gary's the local space enthusiast, Jack explained. Probably the one person in town who might actually figure out you're real. We need to avoid him. They walked through the festival, which was now in full swing. Booths lined the streets selling alien merchandise. Children ran around in green face paint. A man on stilts dressed as a tall gray alien posed for photos. Your people seem very interested in life from other worlds, Vila observed, watching a group of teenagers compare their alien t-shirts. Humans have always wondered if we're alone in the universe, Jack replied. Some hope we're not. Others fear it. And which are you? Zix asked. Jack smiled. I'm a filmmaker. I'm curious. They stopped at a large tent where a woman was setting up displays. A sign read Professor Linda Wright, Meteorite Exhibition. This is what we need, Jack whispered. According to what you told me, those space rocks might contain the minerals you're looking for. They entered the tent. Glass cases displayed various meteorites, each with a description card. Professor Wright, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair, looked up from her work. Welcome. The exhibition doesn't officially open until 2 o'clock, but you're welcome to look around while I set up. Thanks, Jack said, then whispered to the aliens. Act normal. Vila approached a display case. These samples appear promising, she said quietly to Zix, particularly the olivine-rich specimens. Professor Wright overheard. You know your meteorites. Are you in the field? Jack jumped in. They're, geology students, just amateur enthusiasts. The professor smiled. Well, you have a good eye. Those particular samples came from a fall in Arizona just last year. They contain rare earth elements that are quite valuable. Zix studied the display. Are these specimens available for purchase? I'm afraid not, Professor Wright replied. They're part of the university collection. I'm just displaying them for educational purposes. Jack saw the aliens exchange concerned looks. He pulled them aside. We need those specific ones, he asked in a low voice. The larger specimen contains elements critical for our propulsion system, Vila confirmed. Without them, repairs will be impossible. Jack thought for a moment. We can't buy them, but maybe we could borrow them overnight. Return them before anyone notices. You suggest theft. Zix sounded shocked. Temporary borrowing, Jack corrected. For emergency repairs, you'd put them back, good as new. Before they could discuss further, someone called Jack's name. He turned to see his aunt waving from the tent entrance. There you are. The committee's looking everywhere for you. We need your help with the sound system for tonight's presentation. Coming, Jack called back. To the aliens he whispered, meet me back at the house in an hour. I'll come up with a plan. As they left the tent, Jack noticed Gary Peters watching them from across the street. The The hardware store owner had a pair of binoculars hanging around his neck and a determined look on his face. "Great," Jack muttered. "Now we have two problems: getting those meteorites and avoiding Gary." "Perhaps we could solve both problems simultaneously," Vila suggested. "Your festival includes a costume contest, correct?" Jack nodded, not understanding. "If we enter this contest officially," she continued, "it provides a legitimate reason for our appearance. And during the event, attention will be diverted, creating an opportunity to access the meteorite specimens." Jack grinned slowly. "That's actually brilliant. Everyone will be watching the stage, including Gary." Zix looked uncertain. "Is it wise to place ourselves in such a visible position?" "Sometimes," Jack said, "the best place to hide is in the spotlight." The town square filled with people as the sun began to set. Colored lights hung from trees, and a stage stood at the center with large speakers on either side. A banner above read, "25th Annual Starpoint UFO Festival Costume Contest." Jack stood backstage with Zix and Vila, watching the crowd grow. He had spent the afternoon helping them prepare for the contest and planning their meteorite borrowing mission for later that night. "Remember, just walk across the stage when they call your names, wave to the crowd, and exit on the other side," Jack explained. "Try to look happy." "Happy," Zix repeated, attempting to smile. The result was somewhat unsettling. "Maybe just nod politely," Jack suggested. Diane appeared, clipboard in hand. "There you are. I've got you registered as contestant number 14. She looked at the aliens. "Those costumes are even more impressive under these lights. The blue one literally glows." Vila's skin did indeed have a slight luminescence in the dimming light. "Thank you," she said. "It is a natural effect." "Well, the judges will love it," Diane said. "Good luck." As Diane walked away, Jack noticed Gary Peters near the edge of the stage, talking to one of the judges and gesturing in their direction. "Gary's still suspicious," Jack whispered, "but stick to the plan. Once the contest is over, we'll sneak back to the exhibition tent." The contest began. One by one, people in alien costumes walked across the stage. Some wore simple masks and jumpsuits. Others had elaborate outfits with moving parts and special effects. The crowd cheered for each contestant. Number 8 was a man named Pete Johnson. He rolled onto the stage in a homemade flying saucer with blinking lights and smoke coming from below. Inside the clear dome top, Pete sat dressed as a classic gray alien, operating controls that made the saucer spin. The crowd went wild. "That isn't accurate at all," Zix muttered. "Our ships don't use such primitive light displays." Number 9 was even more popular. 8-year-old Amy Collins walked on stage in a costume that made her look like an alien queen. Her mother had spent months creating it from recycled materials. Amy's costume had movable wings and a crown that lit up when she pressed a button. The crowd clapped and cheered loudly. "These humans are quite creative," Vila observed. Finally, it was their turn. "Now welcoming contestant number 14. The announcer called. Zach and Vicky from California with their ultra-realistic alien visitors." Zix and Vila walked onto the stage. The crowd grew quiet at first, then burst into applause. Jack watched from backstage, recording everything with his camera. "Look at the detail. How do those eyes move like that? Best costumes I've ever seen." The aliens waved awkwardly as Jack had instructed them, then exited the stage. They seemed relieved when they rejoined Jack. "You did great," he assured them. "Now we wait for the results." After all contestants had performed, the judges huddled together. Gary Peters kept pointing at his clipboard and gesturing toward the aliens. Finally, the head judge nodded and handed the announcer an envelope. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have our winners," the announcer said. In third place, Zach and Vicky with their ultra-realistic aliens. The crowd applauded. Jack nudged the aliens forward to accept their small trophy and ribbon. Third place, Zix whispered, sounding genuinely confused. but we are actual aliens. In second place, Amy Collins as the Alien Queen. The little girl jumped up and down with excitement as she collected her trophy, and the grand prize winner of this year's costume contest, with his amazing homemade flying saucer, Pete Johnson. The crowd erupted in cheers as Pete rolled his saucer back onto the stage. Backstage again, Zix looked at the small third-place trophy. I don't understand. Our appearance is perfect. We are genuine extraterrestrials. Jack tried not to laugh. That's the irony. You're too realistic. People expect aliens to be more theatrical. Human logic is strange, Vila said. Look on the bright side, Jack replied. You weren't too memorable, which is perfect for our midnight mission. And now everyone, including Gary, thinks you're just really good costume makers. As the crowd dispersed to other festival events, Jack checked his watch. The meteorite exhibition closes in an hour, and Professor Wright leaves at 9. Then we make our move. The night was cool and clear, with stars shining brightly over Starpoint. Most festival goers were at the big dance or watching the outdoor movie about alien invasions. The exhibition area was dark and quiet. Jack, Zix, and Vila moved silently between tents. They reached Professor Wright's meteorite exhibition and paused, listening for any sounds. All clear, Jack whispered, shining a small flashlight at the tent flap. Remember, we're just borrowing these rocks overnight. We'll return them before the exhibition opens tomorrow. Inside, they moved carefully between display tables. Vila led them to the case with the meteorites they needed. This security system is very simple, she said, examining the lock. She pulled a small device from her pocket and held it near the case. The lock clicked open. Advanced technology has its advantages, Zix commented, lifting the glass top. Vila carefully removed 3 softball-sized meteorites and placed them in the bag Jack had brought. He winced at how heavy they were. Got them, Jack whispered. Now let's. A flashlight beam suddenly cut through the darkness, catching them in its light. I knew it. Gary Peters stood at the tent entrance. I knew there was something strange about you two. Jack's heart sank. Gary, I can explain. No need, Gary interrupted, stepping closer. I figured it out. You're not special effects artists. You're meteorite thieves. Jack blinked in surprise. What? Professional thieves who use elaborate costumes as cover, Gary continued. I've read about people like you. You travel to shows and exhibitions, posing as enthusiasts, then steal valuable specimens. Jack almost laughed with relief. Even when catching them in the act, Gary still didn't suspect the truth. You've got us all wrong, Jack said, thinking quickly. We're just borrowing these for a scene in my documentary. We'll bring them back tomorrow. Gary crossed his arms. Why didn't you just ask Professor Wright? We didn't want to bother her, Jack replied. Look, I know how this looks, but I promise we're not stealing anything. Gary seemed unsure. Zix stepped forward. Perhaps we can show you why we need these specimens, he said, if you agree to keep our secret. Jack shot Zix a worried look. Was he about to reveal everything? Gary hesitated, then nodded. Fine. Show me. 3 hours later, as midnight passed, Gary stood in stunned silence beside the alien ship. Jack had never seen the talkative hardware store owner so quiet. This changes everything, Gary finally whispered. Real aliens. At our festival. Now you understand why we needed the meteorites, Jack said. And why no one can know about us, Vila added. Your world isn't ready for official contact. Gary nodded slowly. I've dreamed of this moment my whole life. He watched as Zix used the meteorites to repair a glowing panel inside the ship. What happens now? We finish repairs, wait for our rescue ship, and leave, Zix explained. No one ever knows we were here. Except us, Jack said, putting his hand on Gary's shoulder. Gary looked sad. No one would believe me anyway. By dawn, the repairs were complete. The four of them stood beside the ship as pink light touched the desert hills. "Our rescue vessel arrives tonight," Vila said. "We are grateful for your help." "Before you go," Jack said, holding up his camera, "can I get one last bit of footage for my documentary?" The aliens agreed. Jack recorded as they gave a tour of their ship and a formal statement acknowledging humanity's potential as future galactic partners. "One more thing," Zix said as they prepared to leave. "We would like to return next year." Jack was surprised. "Really? Why?" "Your festival," Vila explained. "We find it fascinating. The human imagination, the community spirit. We have nothing like this at home. And perhaps next year," Zix added with what might have been a smile, "we will win the costume contest." Gary laughed. "Maybe with a few more lights and some moving parts." They returned the meteorites before the exhibition opened. No one ever knew they were gone. 1 year later, the Starpoint UFO Festival featured a special screening of Jack's documentary, cleverly edited to suggest a work of fiction. As attendees debated its authenticity, two oddly familiar contestants swept the costume contest with their incredibly realistic alien outfits. And high above, an invisible ship watched the celebration, its crew learning that sometimes the best way to understand humans was to pretend to be one.